Greetings, friends, brothers, sisters, devotees of the divine. In the world, I am known as Dr. Dennis L. Hunter, and in esoteric communities and among my closest friends, I am often known as Adesh Wodan. I have wanted to do a video such as I'm doing now for a long, long time. Yogi Bhajan, monster or master of Kundalini Yoga? Yogi Bhajan, monster or master of Kundalini Yoga. In 1969, I was in a place called Virginia Beach, Virginia, and like a certain percentage of young men, I was waiting to see if I was going to be drafted. And if I was going to be drafted, I wondered if I wouldn't just enlist instead. Well, I did both. That summer was something called Woodstock up in New York. It's a legendary concert which most people know about. If you don't, you can Google it, obviously. I was working with several people of my age, and they decided to go. And this was how I first became aware of some kind of a yogi that wore all white in a white turban, who presented himself on stage in front of who knows how many people. Some say over 1 million. There was a lot of people. That was my first limited awareness of Yogi Bhajan. Well, I did go into military service, and I did complete my education when I got out. I do remember a couple of instances at airports when I would see Yogi Bhajan. He would come walking through with his entourage of magnificently noble-looking Sikhs dressed in white with white turbans and men with long beards. But I didn't really get to know him until Tucson, Arizona. I think to understand Yogi Bhajan and the time that he lived, we have to realize what kind of a time it was. There was not really a whole lot of public knowledge of things like yoga. Oh, there was some out there. There had been a few, I guess you'd call them Hindu yogis that had come by and had done their teachings, and certainly. But there was not so much awareness, I think, as there was after Yogi Bhajan came. He was a very interesting man. He was my teacher for a time, though I never became a Sikh. I would rise in the morning, 3:30, 4 o'clock. I would do the yoga. I would sometimes go to the ashram, many times in the morning. I sometimes even was asked to sit in and do a yoga class or two, because every afternoon at the Mahadeva ashram, 5 o'clock, I believe it was. Maybe I'm wrong about that time, but there would be a yoga class. I think we in the West have an idea of a holy man. I think we have the image or the context, I think, of a Christ as a Jesus. We think that they are to be perfect. We think that they're to walk on water, that they see all and know all. I think we have an expectation of perfection, which is sometimes a bit unfair. And although not everyone saw Yogi Bhajan like that, many of them saw him as an enlightened master, as he very well may be. They saw him as something very special, and they devoted their lives, their time, their resources to him, the development of his ashrams, if you will, under his guidance, supervision. Yogi Bhajan did more than just teach some yoga. He, in my mind, was a little bit like Martin Luther. From those of you who know, the gentleman that broke away and started the Protestant Revolution, then began the Lutheran Church, and then things went from there. Yogi Bhajan was a Sikh religion leader, born into, raised into, and lived the life. But as a Sikh, he wanted to get back, I think, to a lot of the basics. When he came, he was a veritable library, a treasure trove full of the information, of the heritage, of the history, of the knowledge that comes from that part of the world in the Punjab in India. And we were all grateful to have him, and he was an astounding figure. He had tremendous charisma. And I was, if you'll pardon the overused expression, very blessed to have met with him personally, privately. He seemed to take an interest in me, of course, many others. And I had opportunities to discuss things that were important to me. And the things that he taught or told me about how my life might progress, well, I have to say thus far it's been fairly accurate. This man came with nothing, and he ended up with perhaps as many as 200,000 followers. He ripped open the veil between the East and the West of all kinds of different yogic practices. And he was very much criticized and condemned in some quarters for that. But he came not with just as a yoga teacher, but he brought a whole lifestyle, a way of looking at the world. He brought a whole way of living and being, to be a householder, to be married, to have children perhaps, and to have a life of a monk and be a yogi. Challenging it was, oh yes, very challenging. Not everybody could do it. But many of us were attracted to his light and were blessed by him and his teachings. Though he came with nothing, he started many, many businesses. Became what some would call very wealthy. Of course, he doesn't have any of that now. He was on occasion criticized for the way he might use or spend money, but for every story that seemed that he was a bit of a spendthrift, you can find ways that he was extremely benevolent and helpful and helping others out quietly on the side who needed money, who had issues. And he was a very excellent teacher. Used to say he only has one student, and that's himself. He used to say initiation, he didn't initiate anybody. He said, you initiate yourself. An interesting concept which I've grown to appreciate more and more. But as his fame grew and he was known by many political leaders and traveled about the world and started hundreds of ashrams, he became older, as we all do. He became sick. He eventually succumbed, as we all do, and made his transition. But what he left behind was a tremendous legacy that I think was a hallmark, a pillar of the whole generation of the age of Aquarius, of the so-called New Age, which now more and more we realize wasn't anything about a New Age. It was about resurrecting teachings that had been lost or forgotten or pushed aside, and now for the next age to merge them together into one harmonious, unified whole. But like any great man, any popular man, he became controversial. I would see him be angry with people. I would see him be disappointed, almost depressed. I'd also see him with extreme insight and caring. But the big thing he did is he never quit. He kept moving, he kept going. And now we, the children of the Khalsa, if you will, and much of the periphery, enjoy what his sacrifices and his teachings provided us. Now, I'm not officially a Sikh, although I love Sikh Dharma, and it is one of the few places in this lifetime that has felt like home to me. But as I begin to say, he was controversial, and sometimes the way he would teach, how he would teach, the way he would interact with people. But I saw it as tremendously useful and insightful. And without going into that, the big issue is Yogi Bhajan, was he a monster? Well, some people claim that there were sexual improprieties. There was an investigation done after his death to see if some of these rumors were true, and it looks like some believe that perhaps some of them were. Yogi Bhajan was very human. He was a man. He was not a god. But he was, in my opinion, a master of Kundalini Yoga. And there's scant places where I have been where I haven't realized the insight and wisdom that he had in the way he taught it. Taught it mostly by immersion. You just go for it. The audacity of this man to come and do the things he did, to accomplish what he did, to try things which had never been tried before, and ultimately to be successful and leave a legacy not so much in himself, but an expanded, perhaps, view of his religion. Sikhi is probably less of a religion than most, though it certainly has its cultural trappings and its traditions, but the core of it is very special. And if you have any time to read or to spend with Sikhs, do it. If you have a heart that's prayerful and serviceful and desires to know God and desires to be at one and harmonious with the universe, you will find solace there. So Yogi Bhajan, did he do some terrible things? Well, perhaps. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he had his weak moments. I also know that almost every successful public person, they're almost always as detractors, people who are disappointed, who expected him to be things that he wasn't and never said he was. So there is always that controversy left over. And there are numbers of people who are very disappointed and disheartened because they think perhaps he wasn't the man that they thought he was. But I say he's exactly the man he claimed to be. He was a Sikh, come to share his Dharma, his heritage with people, and to teach Kundalini Yoga, which most people say doesn't have anything to do with Sikhism, say it's confusion. Well, I don't think it's confusion. It reflects a person who, in my opinion, was indeed a Kundalini master. Now, you don't have to believe me or anything I'd say about him. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of videos on YouTube and other places, and you can listen to them and see the man for yourself. See what he said, how he acted, how he went about doing things. When all is said and done, Yogi Bhajan opened up a way of being to me that was very special. And about the time I became more involved in the ashram, and when I was doing yoga and still being a father and a husband and still working full time, I began to wonder if I should have a name. Not to digress too much, but It was not always clear what I should be called when I was born, and it wasn't until I was 16, 17 years old and needed a driver's license that the whole issue was straightened out, and I was given a name. But much of my youth I would have nicknames, and I continue to have nicknames, so-called, throughout my life. I think part of that is people feel unsettled and they don't know always what to call me. So as is in the Bible and many other traditions, sometimes when a person begins a special path or a point on a path, they get a new name. God certainly gave people in the Old Testament new names, and it's not unusual to be christened or to be initiated and come up with a spiritual name or just a new name altogether. I was wondering about this in my wife, who had become a full psychic channel. As I was wondering about this, she obviously drifted into her state, and she said that I should be called Adesh. I wasn't quite sure what Adesh meant. Like anything, it can be interpreted in a number of ways. Found out later it's a Sanskrit thing. But that all sounded interesting, and I kind of tucked it behind. But I decided that I wanted to, in recognition of my closer association and the path that I was treading, I wanted to be known by my own spiritual name, so-called. So I requested of Yogi Bhajan. I said, "Sir, may I have a spiritual name?" And I submitted it in writing. And lo and behold, came out. He said, "You may call yourself Adesh Singh." Singh being a name that's used by almost all males that are of his particular heritage and religious heritage and practice. The strange thing about it was I went back to my wife and I said, "Well, how did this happen? How did you know that?" I said, "Yogi Bhajan gave me this name." Her source came back at me a couple days later, I believe it was, and said, "Yogi Bhajan didn't give you your name. The source, the divine spirit, that's what gave you your name." So there's a little bit about why in some places that I'm known as Adesh. So anyway, I was not to become a committed Sikh, but I was definitely a devotee of sorts and a learner. I went on to learn other things in other places, just as Yogi Bhajan suggested I probably would. And now, looking back at his life and looking at all the controversies, people sometimes want to make him a monster. Sometimes they want to make him an enlightened master who could see and know everything, do everything. What I had to say about that is this man did a tremendous amount of good, taught a tremendous amount of wisdom, not just information, but a lifestyle, a way of living and a way of being. And I am reminded of a play by Shakespeare called Julius Caesar, and in it there's a line that says, "The good men do lives after them, and the evil is often interred in their bones." And I say, so let it be with Yogi Bhajan. I treasure the time I spent with him. I am totally in shock and awe at the magnificent life he had and all that he accomplished and all the people that he touched. And I am sure, as this great one once called me friend and brother, there's no sense of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So be gentle, be kind, be forgiving, accept the good, and let it be at peace. so that every morning with great pride and joy, as a Sikh and others might say, Ek Onkar Satanam Kartapurk Nirpal Nirvera Kalamurit Ajane Saibanga Guru Prashada Jap Adda Sach Jugada Sach Hebe Sach Nanaka Hosibi Sach. Comes from part of the Jap Ji from the early morning prayers. I thank my Lord God Jeshua for the wondrous life I've had and the magnificent people and teachers that I've been drawn to. And I just wanted to say how full of adoration and gratitude is my heart for this magnificent teacher. I am Adesh, and I am here. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.